Like I said, welcome to the DesignBase webinar on deployment. This webinar is basically about how to set up and deploy DesignBase. So what we'll do is we'll start with how to download and install the components. So if you come into DesignBase, to the DesignBase website, you'll notice, among other things, there's a support link. If you click on that support link, I'm already logged in, so it doesn't prompt me to enter my security code. If you don't have a security code, it will prompt you for that code. You can fill out the form, press proceed, and it will email you your registration key. So once you do that, you want to come into downloads, and you'll notice that the license agreement is here, but also the web component is listed here. And all of the database components are down below the web component. So there are really two different installs that you must perform to get DesignBase installed. The first is the database. So it's my suggestion you install the database first and catalog all the programs in the accounts that you need, and then do the website. It becomes much easier if you have the database components installed before you install the web components. So you just go down to your database and click on the option that you want to download. If it's a new install, you probably want to use the full complete install. So you see we have Universe and all of its platforms, Unidata and its platforms, Onware, D3, and QM. We are about to add MVBase and Open Insight. So you download those, either the full or the upgrade, and follow the instructions here on the right side on how to install those. Once you do that, you come into the web component. I'll just bring over. You click on this link, and it will pop up the web component manual. It starts with a small introduction and then the quick start. And this is basically telling you that you need to have a Windows machine for the web install, XP 2000, 2003, and also 2008 and Windows 7. IIS must be installed, and by the way, Windows 7 must be the professional version because IIS is not included in the home version. And the same thing with XP. It must be the professional version and not the home version. So IIS must be installed, so you need to install that. The database needs to be installed, the database components, and then your connection object. Let's talk about what that really looks like, and if I can find the place that I want to be in. That's not it. I'm sorry about this. Let's just scroll down a little bit. I lost my place here. Here we go. Okay. So this is really the way DesignBase is built. So I want to talk about this a little bit. So you have your web server and you have your database. So on IIS, after IIS is installed, you need to install Site Builder and Config Editor, and that's up on the top. And I'll show you how to do that in a little bit. And System Manager. Once Site Builder and System Site Builder and System Manager installed, you'll be able to then configure. But the way DesignBase works is when a user comes in, they request data from IIS. It forwards it to the pooler. The pooler then decides which is the next open bridge, and this bridge is a connection between the web server and the database. So the user will get the connection, The bridge will send the request to the database. The database will send back the data that is requested or the form that is requested and send that then back to the web server, and it sends it off to the user. At that point, the user is disconnected from the bridge, making it available for the next user. These bridge components use a connection object to connect between the web server and the database. In Universe and Unidata, this is UniObjects. In D3, prior to release 9, it's MV.NET. Release 9 and higher, we use the native .NET API that's included with D3 and MVBase for that matter. Okay, so that's really what we are concerned with, that question, that issue with the connection. What is the connection object? So this is what the connection object does. It connects between the web server and the database on a one-to-one relationship. So for each bridge takes up one database port. Okay, so that's all I really wanted to talk to you about. Okay, so let's go back up to the top. So I just wanted to explain that so you understand what the database connection is. So if you're using D3 prior to release 9, you will have to install MV.NET. You can use the most recent version of MV.NET. I think it's 4.2. Then you need to download the two components, DesignBase System Manager and DesignBase Site Builder. I suggest installing the System Manager first, and then Site Builder, and then configuring System Manager, and then running Site Builder to build your site. Okay, so once the System Manager is installed and the Site Builder is installed, it will bring up it'll create a folder called DesignBase in the Start menu, and you see that it created 3 programs. Configuration Editor is installed with Site Builder. Okay, so you get the Configuration Builder with Site Builder and System Manager, and then you have your uninstalls. If you are installing or upgrading DesignBase from a previous version, you will need to go to the Uninstalling DesignBase Web Component section here, because there is a specific way to uninstall DesignBase before you reinstall a new version. All your configuration will be maintained when you install the new version, but there's a specific way to uninstall DesignBase, and that's all in this web component. So let's go back. Whoops, I'm sorry. Let's go back to All Programs, DesignBase, and we will start System Manager. Okay, right now DesignBase is started, so when System Manager starts up, it will start DesignBase, but I'm going to stop it so that we can look at the configuration. To enter your configuration or change it, DesignBase must be stopped. If it is started, if DesignBase is started, all of the fields will be disabled except for number of connections. And I'll explain that in a little bit. So let's stop DesignBase. And go back to Startup Configuration. You'll notice that when we click inside a field, you'll get help about that field on the right side. Admin IP allows the DesignBase web server to talk to another server and send messages to another server as long as Windows Messaging Service has been installed and configured on both machines. Okay, so you put in a server ID here, a URL, or not a URL, but an IP address or a server name, in there. You do want to test it to send a test message, and then the messages will, any system messages or any errors that pop up will show up on that other server. Admin email, again, any error messages, any system warnings could be emailed to whatever email address you put in here. The only caveat here is that you have to have SMTP installed on your web server for this to work. Port base. That is the starting IP port, TCP IP port, that you're going to use on your web server. We suggest not changing these unless you have an application that's running that uses that specific port. So when you start DesignBase, the pooler that's running is going to be running it on port 8500. Every connection, that DB bridge connection, will be 8500 and above, be 8501 and above. So if you have two connections set up, your connectors will be on 8501 and 8502. Host. What database host are you using? Is it the same as where the web components are installed, or do you have a second server that is holding your database, that is hosting your database? If it is a second server, you want to put in the IP address here of the second server hosting your database. And it could be Windows, it could be Linux, it could be HPUX, whatever your database supports, DesignBase will support. Login account, I usually tell people that when they first start and test the application, put in the DBI demo account as your test account, as your login host, login account. This, when DesignBase starts, it will log that DB bridge on to the database using this account. Once you've tested the installation and you pull over your working accounts, you may want to change this to the initial account that DesignBase will connect to. Login host type. Again, you see all of our host types. You can just pick the one that you're using. If you are using a public environment, or if you're creating a public environment, you need to create a public login. You don't need to create it on the web server. You just need to put in what the public login is going to be here. We will discuss that in a little bit. User, when the DB bridge connects, it's going to connect to that account, to this user, and to this password. Okay, so you need to put in login, password, and confirm the password. Number of connections, or the number of DB bridge connections that you need to open, that you want to open for DesignBase. Now, we'll only start one at a time, so you can put connections up to 10 here if you like. DesignBase will start them as it needs them. Connection provider, for Universe and Unidata, it's UniObjects. MV.NET for D3 prior to Release 9. Release 9 and above uses the D3 connection, and OpenInsight. And just the IP address of this machine. So that's setting up the initial startup configuration for DesignBase. Once you have done that, you can then go into the start and start up DesignBase. The next thing is starting the creating your site builder, creating your site. So if we go into Site Builder, you'll notice the computer name, that's unchangeable. That's the name of your computer that you've installed Site Builder on. You can change the default website. This comes from, and I'll call up the IIS so you could see this. So we'll go into Internet. Open that up a bit. Sites. You'll see default website. Okay, so I only have one website installed on this server. So this website comes up, whoops, I'm sorry, comes up in the selected websites in Site Builder. If you were to create your own, right-click on it, add a website, and it will add one underneath as a new website for your IIS configuration. If you want to learn more about that, you will need to go online and read up on IIS. So you can install Site Builder or install your site in any of the defined websites. Physical directory, where do I want to install the website on disk? So you can say C:, you can put in D:, whatever physical directory you want to store the website in. And I'll create it as DB3. And the virtual directory, how IIS sees this site. If we go back to IIS real quick, if I go into default website, you see I have multiple websites set up. Okay, so this virtual directory, DB or DB2, will be what is recognized in your virtual directory. However you set this up here, that's how it will be defined in IIS. Basic authentication, the authentication type. Basic authentication is the default mode. That means that DesignBase will prompt for a Windows user ID and password when the user first connects to DesignBase. So basically, every user that connects will have to have a Windows password and Windows login and password. Integrated, that means that you're using a domain controller or Active Directory so that all of your users, when they turn their PC on, they log into the domain. So this is saying use the domain password that they've already logged in as and do not prompt them again for another domain, for another login. This is I don't particularly like this scenario only because I think there's a security risk here. If you're using a domain controller and say integrated Windows authentication and a user is logged in and they walk away from their desk for 10 or 15 minutes, another user can come up immediately after they leave their desk and get on to DesignBase and have their complete security settings because there's no login required. So you really need to think about that when you think about integrated as opposed to basic authentication. Anonymous is used for public websites. So when you log in anonymous, when you create a public website, it will not prompt for a login and password. And you may, at some point when you create an anonymous login, maybe you want to, the first thing you do is create a application login. So the user has to log into your application so that it knows what security settings are for that user. The DesignBase website was set up as an anonymous login. So when you first come into the DesignBase website, there is no login, but you're in DesignBase. So that's what anonymous is used for. Mixed is a combination of basic authentication and anonymous. So you can have both in one. I suggest separating them. Do you want all your logins to be forced to lowercase? Sometimes this is a good thing because a user can type in a Windows login in uppercase, but the user file in DesignBase could be lowercase. So if the case doesn't match the way they enter it, you're going to get an error saying this user is not on file with DesignBase or whatever that error message is. cannot identify the start account for that user. So sometimes that makes sense. You may want to turn that on to yes. Long file names, it will strip out the domain if you're using a domain controller. Okay, so then the only thing left to do once you set up all these is click on the build. Now, when you're building your website, you have to be careful because DesignBase will restart IIS during this build. So if there are other websites that are live on this web server, you may not want to run Site Builder during the day because it will stop and start IIS. So I'm going to say yes to that. It'll build the site. And as soon as it finishes building, it takes a few seconds. Okay, so that's successful. So now DesignBase is built. We can, it is started, so now we can go into DesignBase and say, okay, well, this is localhost, so because I installed it all on my local PC, /db3. Did I call it db3? What did I call it? Can't remember what I called it. Okay. Well, let's look at, let's go in and look at it. Oops, it's in D. DB3. Let's try that again. / localhost / DB3. Not sure why that's doing that. IIS does not see it. That's interesting. Okay, let's just move on. We'll go into is DesignBase started? Yeah. Let's look at 2. See if that's there. Yeah, 2 is there. Okay. Not sure why 3 isn't working. So now, when you first log into your website, you want to go into style definitions. Because remember, you're building your website for the first time. You moved in all of your accounts. Okay, so you want to make sure you log into those accounts and run your style sheet. You need to build your style sheet based on your account. So I'm sure you've made some changes to your style sheets. So you want to log into that account and you want to type in normal. Doesn't matter which style you bring up here, as long as you bring it up and click on the submit button. What that does is it rebuilds your style sheet and saves it in your IIS configuration for this website. Okay? Once you do that, you need to refresh so it rereads the style sheet. Style sheet is only read at startup. So when you start DesignBase, log into DesignBase, it will then start your website. Then read the style sheet. So if you make changes to your style sheet, you need to make sure you refresh your web page so that it gets the new styles. Okay. So now let's go back to, I just want to show you what would happen if we try to rebuild this site. DB, I'll do DB3. Oh, I might not have changed the virtual directory. That may be why. Okay. So if we try to rebuild it again, let's say you bring on a new version of DesignBase, you have a new version of Site Builder, so you need to rebuild, you're doing an upgrade, you need to rebuild your site. So basically I'm simulating that here. It says IIS will be restarted, but it also comes back and says there is already a DB3 site. Are you sure you want to do this? Because what it'll do is it'll take the DB3, copy it to an old name, and then go forward. If you say no here, it will exit out. So if I say yes here, now it'll come back and say, do you want to retain your existing style sheets? In other words, copy it from the original site and move it into this site. So I want to say yes to that. Do you want to retain your existing images? So any images you loaded on that web server, do you want to bring them over to the new site? Yes. Do you want to retain your existing configuration file? However you configured DesignBase in System Manager, do you want to retain that? If I say yes there, that's fine. Oh, I selected next. Doesn't matter. So it'll build that site. Okay, now it's successful. And we should be able to, let's see if it works this time. Localhost DB. There we go. So now I'm in local. Oh, I want to be in DB3. There we go. So now I'm in DB3. Okay. So that's DesignBase, the installation and setup of Site Builder. Within Site Builder, there is also the Configuration Manager, Configuration Editor. So if we bring up the Configuration Editor, yeah, I did create it as DB, so I have some cleaning up here to do. And I created it as mixed. So that's why I had an issue with logging in. This allows you to edit your website. So let's say you have a website that you want to make, that you want to build that uses a different database. So let's say this DB3 website. I can, if these are all blank, it's going to use the existing configuration in the, it's going to use this original configuration. You can then change that to say, okay, well, my host is going to be abc.com. My host type may be universe. It might be a different type. It could be D3. The login account could be different. You can change all this information and go forward. So the configuration editor allows you to change the way you connect to a specific website and how that connection is configured. So if you're using a different address, your login and username must be the same on the existing site as on the web server as it is in the database server. Public login can be different, so you want it to be different if you have multiple web servers in different public websites. So you want to have a different login for each of your public websites. Okay, let's close that. Any questions about the configuration manager or editor before I move on? Okay. There is one question coming in. Do I recommend changing login account from DBI demo? Yes, because what's going to happen, let me explain that a little bit. We can get out of there. Let's go back here. you'll notice that I'm sorry, I clicked on connection loading. So these are all of the DB webs that are the DB bridges that are started at this point using DesignBase. You'll notice that it's logged into DBI demo. So that's the first thing it does, is it logs into the configuration load account, the login account. If you're never going to use DBI demo and your users are always going to log on to a different account, you want to change that account, because DesignBase will take some time to log into that different account when the user connects. And you can see it's a shared connection type. Well, those connection types can be shared, switched, or dedicated. We suggest, for the best throughput, for the connection types to be shared. I can actually bring that up in the manual. Connection loading. Connection types are in here somewhere. I did see it. I'm sorry, just looking for that. Installation, user authentication. Okay, well, I know it's in here somewhere. I'm not sure exactly where. Okay, I'm sorry. The connections shared will allow DesignBase to. It is the fastest connection, and it will allow DesignBase to log into ports, to log into accounts, to maximize efficiency. So you may have 2 or 3 connectors running. Okay, 2 connectors, all 3 connectors logged into DBI demo. 2 of those connectors are being used right now by users. The 3rd connector is sitting idle. A user logs in and wants to use the db.abc account. So DesignBase will connect them to that free connector, which is right now logged into DBI demo, and log it onto the db.abc account. And it will sit there until somebody else needs to log it to a different account. Dedicated means that it's only going to be used for one account and one account only. So you tell DesignBase that this connector is always logged into DBI demo and cannot be used for any other account. So that's connections. Any other questions about that? I want to go back into the System Manager and have a look at what all this is in the connection loading. So you have the port shared. It's a shared account. You see the hits, the entries. If there's something goes wrong with this connection, it will turn pink, which means that there is a problem. The hit entry date and time is greater than the exit, which means that port did not come back in a timely fashion back to the pooler. Now, there's a couple issues there that can be related. You either it's stuck in an infinite loop, the program went into a debug status, or there is some other kind of error. Normally, it's an infinite loop or went into a debug status. If that is the case, you will need to clean that up. You can click on that line and click Restart Selections, or restart all connections. Okay, and that will restart your connection and free up that port again. But you do want to go in and look at the error and see what that is and fix it before you restart the connection. We can look at account loading, so you can see what accounts are loaded. Active users shows the users that are connected to the web server at this time. We saw active. There is a hit chart, which allows you to show the hits based on a 24-hour time span. You can increase, so you see the number of hits. If we click the arrow, you see time span in hours. Okay, and these are in by hits. So you can see how many hits by the hour for the 24-hour period. Special connections, really not used anymore. These are used to create public websites usually, and also create dedicated ports. So if I go, whoops, I need to stop DesignBase first. Go into special connections, create a new connection, and you can see the connection types. If I wanted to make a connection dedicated to a specific account, I could do that through the special connections. I have to fill in all this information. You don't have to worry about Q code, so it's just the number of these dedicated connections that you're setting up for this specific account. Machine access allows you to create a connection with a specific machine and then use that profile to log in. All of this is defined in the web manual, so you can go back and look at that at another time. I think I've gone through everything here. So let's exit out of there, and I want to just jump into DesignBase real fast. Come on. Okay. And explain just a couple things here. Go into users. Oh, I stopped DesignBase. That's why it's not. There we go. Okay. We'll go into users real fast and just show you. I'll call up mine. Okay, so when you first set up a user, you give them groups. I'm not going to go into the security. We've already gone into that in another webinar. You give them a starting account name, and this is where DesignBase will log in to that connector if it doesn't find that account already logged into another connector. Okay, so this is what you really want to base your user account on. That's where the starting account resides, and that's how DesignBase knows what account to log in the connector to, is based on the user and where they're coming from. Next is the checklist. You can, once your system is developed, you can create a developer's checklist of changes to a form or to an application using this checklist. So I'll create a new checklist. It's 5. I'll just put in whatever. I'll submit that, and each checklist has an infinite number of pages that you can attach to it. So I'll create a new page. I'll just put in whatever. So I'm using 5, page 1. Then I come down to DesignBase file, and I can put in a file name, DB client, and then a form that I want to add to this page. So we'll just say demo. And I'll click on add, and you'll notice what it does. It brings the form in and creates a link for this form, and everything that that form does is loaded into this template. So I'm using code blocks in this program. There's property files, so it makes sure that all of your dictionaries are loaded onto the, or built into this checklist, so that when you take the checklist and move it to another machine, you can load it, and all of your fields will get loaded as well. So you'll be able to run the form directly from the load. So all the field properties are loaded from every dictionary that is used in that account, in that form. The only thing that's not loaded is a specific program. So if you have a program that you're using to call events on this form, you will need to load that manually. And that's very easy to do. You can just go down to the bottom and do db-lib. It's a data section. You want to load db.i.dbclient, and that's just a program. Okay? So you can add that manually to the list and then submit that. So now what it did is it just created a template of everything that it needs to include in the checklist text file that we're going to build right now. So if I go into checklist update, I can say, okay, now I want to build the text file that I just created using the template. So I'm going to say I want checklist 5, I want page 1. I could put another page in here if I had another page, and then the transfer file name. Okay, it's going to default to transfile dot in your user ID, but you can make that anything you want. Okay, and then click on create. When you click create, it creates that transfile.ric in db-lib. And in most cases, in U2 and QM, JBase, db-lib is a directory. So you can just take that, this is all it is a text file. You can take that text file out of db-lib and move it to another machine, and then click on the load checklist, put in the checklist name, click the submit button, and it moves all of those items into the account that you're accessing. So I moved this file over to db-lib on the other machine, ran checklist update and load checklist update, and then it loaded those items. You will need to recompile and catalog all your programs before you can use the form, but it's very simple to use. That's about all I had. There was one other thing I wanted to discuss, and that is, oops, let's go back in. Sorry about that. Checklist, I need to go back into here. And let's go into installations. I can never find what I'm looking for. Architecture. Here we go. Let's look at the way DesignBase is broken down. Okay, DesignBase, when you first install it, you can tell DesignBase that, or the way you install DesignBase to, you can install it in a multi-tier environment. So the first installation would be a single tier. The first tier is a single tier, which means everything is loaded into one server. You have your web server and your database as one server. So they're all loaded in the same server and access each other as local hosts. Very similar to the way that I'm doing it right now on my PC. I loaded it as a single tier. Okay, this is good for smaller clients and clients that have the database on the Windows environment. If you're a larger client or your users, one of your customers is a larger installation, you may think about going to a two-tier. So we have two-tier A, which means all of your web installs are on one server and your database is on another. This web server must be a Windows-based server with IIS installed, but the database can be any platform that your database supports. So it could be Linux, it could be Windows. It really depends on how you install it and what your installation requires. You can also have a firewall between the two. The only thing you need to open up are these DB bridge ports. So if there's a firewall in between here, you'd have to open up ports 8500 through the number of bridges that you've set up. This is by far the most used tier, two-tier A. We also have two-tier B, which is IIS installed on one server with Site Builder installed on that, and the System Manager and Database installed on another. If you have two Windows servers, you can run this scenario, but if your database is something other than Windows, then you can't use two-tier B. So you can use two-tier A, single-tier, or, I'm sorry, two-tier A for database servers other than Windows, or you can use tier 3, which is IIS installed, Site Builder installed on one server, the System Manager on a second, and the database on a third. These two need to be Windows servers, and this one could be Windows or anything else. You can have a firewall between these two servers and a firewall between these two. The firewall between these two servers, you have to open up the port that the connection object requires. So if you're running UniObjects, whatever port UniObjects listens on, that's the port you have to open up in your firewall here. If you're using a firewall here, the port you have to open up, again, is 8500 to the last bridge. So it's 8501 through 85, in this case, 03. We also have a scaled version of DesignBase implementation where you can have multiple web components, multiple web servers talking to multiple databases with firewalls in between. That's all I really had for today. Are there any questions before we end our session? I'll stay on for a couple minutes to answer any questions. Okay. I am recording this webinar, and it will be on our website sometime today. I thank you very much for viewing all of the webinars. This happens to be the last one in the series. They are all currently, except for this one, on the YouTube site, so you can go back to all of them and take a look and refresh your memory or get some tips or whatever. So if you have any questions after I close this, feel free to send it to support@designbase.com, and we'll answer those questions accordingly. So thank you very much for your time, and have a great day.